Hi, everybody. So, welcome to Chapter 2. This can be traditional Asia from its inception up to the 1800s, kind of beginning the modern world. So, I'm not sure how to cover all of Asian history uh, in a lecture or two, but we're going to give it a shot. So, grab a pen and paper, and we're going to jump right in. But just to help you guys a little bit, so. Asian history is complex. We're going to start off in this lecture with China and Korea. Both of these histories have a very long, both these nations have a very long history of complex, high-level human development. And we're just going to hit some highlights. So, but this is really important because you cannot understand Asian American history if you don't understand the origins in Asia. So, this is important, but it's not very rich too, so it's a pleasure to go into this. The difficulty is to pick and choose and make it manageable in one lecture on this incredibly rich, varied, and long, complex history of Asia. So, but buckle up, we're going to give it a shot. So we'll start off with China. So, okay. So grab your pen and paper, and let's get into China. And again, I'll try really hard just to hit the highlights and help you guys squeeze down what is critical for a takeaway in context of the Asian American experience. All right, so pick it up with China. So there's a geographic map of China. China is geographically quite large. That map probably is maybe even more helpful in the fact you see the vast majority of Chinese population is squeezed relatively close to the coast, and that is because as we scroll back up, the western portion of China is outright desert. The southwestern portion is extremely high mountains. Think Tibet, for example. So the vast majority of Chinese population, not surprisingly, lives in these good agriculture areas, which you see right in front of you. And you see that borne out by the map in front of you. The oranger the color, the greater the population density. All right, so let's move on. The first recorded dynasty we have evidence for is the Tang Dynasty. You can see the dates there, 1500 to 1000. By the way, you don't need to know the dates there. So even though I have that highlighted, you don't need to sweat that, the dates there. I just want you to know, in a nutshell, China's history goes back very far, 1500 to 1000. That's some of the earlier human civilizations. To be sophisticated as they were to match them, China is one of the preeminent ancient sophisticated civilizations. Of course, you have ancient Egypt in the Middle East. You have ancient Assyria or the Sumer Valley there, and say would be Iraq, also very ancient, in India as well. We get to India a little bit later. But what I want you to take away from this is Chinese history goes back very far, and from the beginning, it's highly sophisticated. Let me show you one brief example of that. And that would be its bronzeware. This is from the Tang Dynasty. That piece of artwork you see in front of you is a single cast piece. It's quite complex to cast, to be able to cast metal at this very early date. Just simply put, the Chinese are the best in the world in this era at casting. It's quite complicated to do it. It takes a lot of technological know-how. And the fact that China is doing it so early lets you know from an early date the Chinese are highly sophisticated, very technically skilled. And that's my biggest takeaway for you guys. A couple more examples of that. You see these are two wine pitchers from the Tang Dynasty. Both of them, you can see the level of complexity in the design, the elegance of the design, the beauty of the design. It's also practicality because you could grab that pachyderm by the tail, and you see both of them from the trunk right here. That's where the wine would pour out. Now this elephant's a little more clear because that you pour out here. This one is a bit more complicated, but it is working a similar kind of way. All right. That's the Tang. Again, my takeaway is very early development, highly sophisticated, even at the very early time period. Let's move on to the Chinese language, which is developing in the Tang Dynasty and will continue to develop really all the way in some ways down to today. And again, we'll make this brief, but it's a very different writing style than we are traditionally familiar with in the West. For example, you guys see that brush in front of you, and traditionally you'd use a calligraphy brush to write in Chinese. This makes Chinese quite different in a sense than what you and I are using, say, a pen. Makes it quite different because, again, in a sense, you're using a paintbrush to both write and paint simultaneously. So what that means is it has both an artistry and obviously literacy element combined into one. So a literate Chinese person, it's not only what you write, but the artistry of the writing style itself, which is far more prominent as a source of art than it is for us in the West. Like, for example, again, you're using a pen like this. Now, obviously, penmanship matters. Some people have nice handwriting. But that is a far cry from the artistry of a highly sophisticated Chinese writer who both obviously writes well, so the words they choose are well, but also just the beauty of the calligraphy using a brush is exponentially more, I guess, impactful in a sense than what we can do, obviously, we say with a pen. And I could break down that's more detailed than you guys need, but it does do several things. One is that the Chinese writing style allows an individual to both, again, let's say let me give you an example of what I'm talking about. So William Shakespeare, working in England, when he wrote, the beauty of what he wrote was in the words, in the meaning, in the drama of the poetry, the plays he created. But you're not going to find any museum that has you can find a history museum, and at least in theory, that has a copy of his original text. But it's not going to be in an art museum. No one's going to be oohing and awing over Shakespeare's handwriting. By the way, maybe he's a good handwriter, I don't know. But that's not really what he's doing there. And again, it's the beauty of what he writes. But a Chinese poet of similar stature, say Shakespeare, it's a good chance, actually, it would be both of those. You might find his poetry in a museum of fine art, and it would be there both for the beauty of the language itself, the poetry, the drama, the Romeo and Juliet, if you will. But at the same token, the artistry of the actual written word, the beauty of the appearance of the written word, is also a major statement of the artistic genius of the writer. So let me show you an example of that. So the piece you guys looking there here on the right is a famous poem by the Chinese poet master Li Bo. And although I can't read it, but you can see the wide range of Chinese characters. Some of them have very bold, rough, kind of jagged ink letters. Others are very fine and delicate. So again, it has to be that way. He's artistically choosing that way. So the word itself, like for example, if you're writing the English word tender. Now, tender, tender as in soft and delicate. If you're using a pen like this, you write it out, done. But if you're essentially painting that word with a Chinese ink brush with liquid black ink, when you paint that, how do you choose to paint that word? Do you paint the word soft and delicate with very light, thin, delicate brush strokes? Or do you make them big, heavy, rough brush strokes? Same word, but what is your artistic meaning or feel or atmosphere? What atmosphere do you create with the word itself? My point with all that is to let you know that our Western orientation to writing is one way to do it. But in China, there's a very different way to do it. And it has an artistry that, again, our typical writing just does not encompass because the medium they use, which is, again, using a paintbrush on rice paper, makes it much more artistically expressive of the calligraphy and how you write. You would use liquid ink. As you see, you have an inkstone, liquid ink, and an inkstone right there, and you create a reservoir of black ink there. That'd be a similar kind of brush you would use right there. That would, by the way, be the same kind of brush that you could write with. You could also literally paint with that brush if you chose to. Same brush. This next guy right here is Wang Cixi. You don't need to know him. I just want you to know he's a Chinese master calligrapher. My point with that is, in the West, calligraphy is a very high skill set you have. It's a craft. But calligraphy, for a few exceptions, there's exceptions, but in general, is not going to appear in a museum of fine art. Even though we admire calligraphy, it's a tremendous skill, but it's not considered a fine art. It's considered a very important craft for like wedding invitation cards, etc. But it's not on the same token as a Pablo Picasso piece of art or a Rembrandt or a Vermeer. It's just not in the West. But in Asia, in China, it may be. If it's a very famous poet and he's a master calligrapher at the same time, oftentimes they would be, that you would find his poem in one of the great museums in China. Again, the beauty of the imagery of the poem, but actually his extraordinary artistic talent in the calligraphy in which he wrote that poem would make that a masterpiece of art next to a Chinese landscape. My point that is, our Western-centric view of writing is quite different than traditional Chinese view of writing and their admiration for it. Okay. All right, moving on. The Chinese tradition have great reverence for the past. And that's what I want you guys, this part actually right here's what I want you guys to write down. So take a minute, grab your pen and pencil, and that's what you guys want to write down. In China, there's a cultural tradition of great reverence for the past. And that's certainly the case right here. In the second Chinese dynasty, which is called the Zhou Dynasty, there's three rulers, King Wen, Wu, and Duke Zhou. I don't care so much about their names. I'm not so concerned with that. But what you guys know is they were considered the paragon or ultimate example of a wise Chinese ruler. So from Chinese generations from this time period on, the Zhou Dynasty, down to today, you can see the dates there. If you want to use a comparison of a wise, kind, thoughtful ruler, the Chinese often refer to these three rulers in the very early Zhou Dynasty. Again, you see the dates there. My point with that is great reverence for the historic past, a wise master past, and that's something that would pervade Chinese culture all the way down to the modern era of looking back to these wise masters of the ancient world. A couple more examples of that. You guys are familiar with this. I'll make it short and sweet, but Sun Tzu's Art of War, a classic in the fighting of war. You can see the years when Sun Tzu lived. Sun Tzu, 544 to 496 BC. You can see how early that is. Frankly, that's fairly early in Roman history, the idea how early this is. Quite early in Roman history. That's even the age before classical Greece. But again, Sun Tzu is a brilliant military tactician. If you were in a world history class, would dig into him at a deeper level. I'll make it kind of short and sweet. I just want to let you know how early this is, time-wise, historically. But what a master text that Sun Tzu's Art of War is still today a manual in many military academies around the world. You can go by Barnes & Noble, pick up a copy of Sun Tzu's Art of War. You see the Art of War in business, Art of War in romance. Romance might not be a good idea. But it still is pervasive of being smart when you fight, to read the enemy, know the enemy's winks, know your strengths. The fact that it is as old as it is, but it remains currently still a master text in the discipline of fighting war lets you know, again, the early sophistication, literacy, and brilliance of Chinese civilization in the ancient world. Okay, moving on. How the Chinese view non-Chinese. This is important. Not surprising that Chinese, having such an extraordinary classical civilization, even very early on, probably could not help themselves a little bit in looking down on their inferior neighbors, as they saw it, of course. So in the Chinese view, the Chinese civilization is the best. The best. All other civilizations are graded on how they compare to China. Now, by the way, Americans tend to be very proud of American culture today, too. And if we're not careful, we tend to get very chauvinistic about American culture, too. But that's not unique to America. The Chinese certainly have felt that through nearly all their history. If you ask Chinese historically, what is the most sophisticated, developed, advanced society in the world, and frankly, the best, most cultured, and of course, it'd say right here in China, naturally. And that's the way they viewed the world almost the entirety. And by the way, to be fair to them, it's not just because their preferences are, but China oftentimes was, at least with the neighbors around them. So naturally, they viewed all others around them, and they graded them on how Chinese they were. The more Chinese you are, the more they respected you, because you're like us, and we have the best culture in the world. The less Chinese you are like this, the more inferior you are. All right. Let's move down to Confucius, Chinese master of ethics and proper harmonious society. And we could spend a long time on this. I'm going to try to give you guys a short version. But Confucianism has played a critical role in China, and not just China, East Asia in general, both from the time period of Confucius' life, all the way down today, and it includes, to some extent, even Asian American households today, depending again on how recently families come to the United States, how traditional they are, and what part of Asia they came. But if your family is from China, Japan, Korea, Taiwan, Vietnam, East Asia in general, not South Asia, but East Asia. If your family's East Asia, there's a good chance, again, depends on how long your family's been in the United States and so forth, but your family is likely to have aspects of Confucianism. Now, we blend with other things too, the American way of life, our democratic thinking, education system, etc. But the likely impact of Confucianism, again, especially if there's a recent arrival in the United States, will remain very, very strong and impactful. So what is that exactly? And you can see when he lived, ironically around the same time as Sun Tzu, 551 to 439 BC, and by far he's China's most influential philosopher thinker. So grab your pen and pencil, we're going to write a couple of these things down. In a nutshell, Confucius' life, or, by the way, that's our Americanized version of that. If you're in China, I could call him Confucius, call him Master Gong. They'd say it in Chinese, of course, Master Gong, or Gong Qing Ni, something similar to that. You want to get a Chinese specialist to pronounce it correctly, but something similar to that. His goal is to bring harmony to family, society, and the nation. He's not a religious leader. It's important. Confucianism is not a religion. It's an ethical system to make life here on earth as good as possible. So unlike, say, some other thought systems, say Buddhism or something, it's not a religion. It's an ethical system. Now, it's ethical, but it's based on the here and now in life. How do you make this life work the best? You're not interested in the here and after as a Confucian, not interested in what happens after you die, you go to heaven, what happens. That's not what it's about. It's like, how do you make life here on earth as happy, prosperous, and harmonious as possible? So the short version of it is how do you do that? So let's move on down here. So how do you do that? I mentioned already it's not a religion, but it is about morality and ethics. And I think for time, maybe we'll skip over this stuff right here. Although I will mention this one right here because it's a wonderful example of Confucian thought, which you highlighted in front of you. It says, never impose on others what you would not impose upon yourself. A couple more examples of Confucian wisdom. You don't need to write these down, but just as a sample. Imagine my heart was yours. Again, thinking about the other person. He who learns but does not think is lost. He who thinks but does not learn is in great danger. I love that one. As a professor, I love that especially. Next one, real knowledge is to know the extent to one's ignorance. Yeah, absolutely. But the older I've got, the more I realize, man, there's just a ton of stuff I don't know, but I would like to know, but it's important to know. This is true in the medical field, it's true in dating, it's true in business, true education, you name it, is be aware of your limitations. Not look down on yourself, but just honestly be aware, what do I not know? It's brilliant. A few more Confucian sayings. Our greatest glory is not never failing, but in rising every time we fall. Yep. And this last one I especially like. If I'm walking with two other men, each of them will serve as my teacher. I will pick out the good points of the one and imitate them, and the bad points of the other and correct them in myself. Love it. So let's get practical. So what exactly is Confucianism? I mentioned this ethical system. So basically the idea is if you ethically perform your duties and live a moral life, that translates to a harmonious moral family on a larger set, local community, all the way to nation. So the goal is to do that. Now, how do you do that? Again, what do we mean by ethics? And that means there's certain social organizations that you must ethically follow and perform. It is very hierarchical, by the way. I want you guys to know that. So take a minute right here, especially this one here, I want you guys to be familiar with. It is very hierarchical. So there's definitely a hierarchy within Confucianism. And in Confucianism, there's some core relationships. And your role as Confucian is to properly perform all these relationships. Out of the 5 core relationships, 4 of them are hierarchy, superior, inferior, in which both superior and inferior have a defined roles that they must ethically perform to make sure that the relationship is functioning properly. The first of these is king-subject. It does not have to be just king, by the way. It could also be boss-employee. But it does mean superior, inferior. Ultimately, again, the king in China or the emperor and subjects. Now, how does that relationship work? The king or boss or emperor benevolently or kindly, thoughtfully rules for the good of all by giving commands, orders to the subjects. The subject's moral position is to dutifully, loyally, without question, follow the commands of the superior, the king, the emperor, the boss. If both do that, the king or boss wisely ruling for the good of all, and the subject following dutifully, loyally what is asked of them, if both do that, there's no conflict, society prospers, as Confucius would argue. Same thing within the family. Father, son. Could be mother as well too, but the father's on top. But parents, we'll say just parents, children. So same thing as a last relationship. I won't break it down too far here, but parents love their children, wisely think of the children, guide the children, issue commands for the children to follow. The children, loving the parents, dutifully submit, knowing the parents are correct. They must maintain respect for them. They dutifully follow the parents, are obedient to the parents, even if they don't feel like it, but your morality is to follow your parents' wishes and to respect them. This also comes to gender. Male, female. So husband, wife, husband superior, wife is inferior, according to Confucius. So the husband's the head, he's the leader. The wife dutifully, loyally follows him and is submissive to him. Now, again, these are theories. As you guys can guess, not all real people function this way. But the theories are very powerful traditionally in East Asia. And so you have to be aware of these dynamics. Next one, older brother, younger brother, which really means older age, younger age. The older age, respect, superior, younger age, inferior, dutifully is respectful, following advice, admonitions from the older age. Finally, last, these relationships is friend to friend. Friend to friend is the only one of these that are equal. And friend to friend means same gender, same age, same social class. In that case, they're equals. I treat it as equals. But in most Confucian relationships, they're not equal. In most Confucian relationships, you are either the superior or the inferior, and you know, according to Confucianism, how to properly, morally, ethically perform your role, either as a superior or inferior, and your job is to dutifully do that role, whatever that role is. Whether it's in leadership and guidance, if you're superior, or on the flip side, if you're in the inferior, is to be respectful, submissive, follow the leadership, the commands of the superior. All right. Additionally, Confucianism, again, I mentioned already, but devotion to your role is critical. Confucianism also highly values education. The ideal Confucian person, probably is a man, frankly, but could be women too, but they are a scholar. And they pour themselves into studying the wisdom of, and again, China initially, but the wisdom of China, the wisdom of Confucian thought, understand it properly and live accordingly. And again, education is core to that. In the Confucian world, the great heroes are not generals and artists and rich merchants that have fine houses. That's all fine, but of not great value. What is great value according to Confucian? A Confucian sage, a Confucian scholar. That is the highest respected person because they bring harmony to all by living and teaching that harmony. They bring the greatest good to all. The artist, the general, the merchant, yes, they have an important role for society, but not as important as the Confucian scholar, the most important person in society outside of, say, the king. A few more things about this where we leave Confucianism. Loyalty is critical, especially to your superiors. So filial loyalty means duty, faithful, following and respect and admiration and love and deference to your parents. That's especially important in Confucianism, of great respect for your parents, to honor your parents, to respect your parents, to follow your parents' wishes. Importance of ritual. Ritual is also a big part of Confucianism. Confucianism teaches that rituals are important to reinforce these values. Not surprised to mention education, so Confucians place great emphasis on study. It's critical. Education, self-cultivation is a path to virtuous living. Because again, how can you do the right things if you don't know the right things? So in the Confucian mindset, you know them. Now again, it's not a religion, so you're not praying to a higher being to help you be like, quote, a good person. You're not doing that. Instead, you're studying the proper way. What is the proper way? So I study the proper way, so I find the proper way, and then I live as an act of will to follow that proper way. And oftentimes the way Confucian advance is through study. Now, how is this important? Now, I don't want to say it's just this factor, but this is a factor. go to any institution of higher learning in the United States. Go to Stanford, go to UC Berkeley on the West Coast, go to UCLA, USC, etc. Look at the percentage of East Asian and Asian American students at these institutions of higher learning. Why are they there? Now, by the way, it's not just one factor. There's multiple factors. We'll talk about that when we get farther into the semester. But one of the factors is many of them come from a very strong Confucian background. Now, again, there's other factors too. The energy of immigrants, and there's a lot of factors there. Their insecurity of being in America and feel maybe education is the only path to security. There's a lot of factors in there. But one of them absolutely is the Confucian dedication to, above all, study. The respect that study brings, the power, the protection for family study brings. So it's a well-trodden path to sail out everything for education. Again, it's not just that factor. As I mentioned, other factors are part of the academic success of Asian Americans. But that's one of them, is the Confucian background. Now, finally, this last one, Confucianism is elitist and conservative. Yeah, it is. Because I mentioned how big hierarchy, right? And so the higher education you have, the age, social status, that does put you into elite category. So if you're on the lower categories, life might not be so easy for you, frankly, because the superior categories are the ones running the show. Now, by the way, if you see a Confucian temple of you, don't get sideways. It says temple. Sounds like it's a religion, but it's not really religion. That's really a place to go to pay respect to Confucianism, but it's not a place where you like praying to Confucius. Okay. Significance of Confucian thought in China, Korea, Japan, Southeast Asia, and in the context of us into America. In fact, maybe I should add that. There we go, on the fly. Okay, and into the Asian American experience. Okay. So Confucianism to this day dominates much of East Asian concepts of human relations and ethics. Obviously in Asia, but again, to varying degrees in some. Again, I'd be careful here because the Asian American population is quite diverse. But if you have an East Asian background as Asian American, again, it depends how long you've been in the United States, of course, but there's a good chance that there's a certain degree of Confucianism in your family culture, your community culture, maybe your church culture. My wife and I, when we go to, sometimes we go to a Korean church in the area, and it's like stepping into Korea. The genders tend to separate out, which is a very Confucian kind of thing. There's definitely a hierarchy of status. Of course, the pastor, minister, priest, the top of that hierarchy. There's great respect shown to them. There's also a hierarchy of kind of what jobs you have. Now, people be nice to you, don't get me wrong. Again, depends if it's a bunch of young people or what age they are, but there's a definite Confucian hierarchy in that situation. If an older person asks you to do something, there's a lot of pressure for you to do that. If you're immigrant Asian American parents from, say, Korea, Japan, Taiwan, when their kid is going through high school, many parents are telling him your number one job is to get into Stanford, Berkeley, UC Merced, etc., etc. Make that happen. And your family's counting on you. Your mom and dad will brag about you when you do. And by the way, get you a good job. Marriage, job, respect for the family, also protection in America from some of the challenges of America. But if you're a doctor, if you're a surgeon, if you're a dentist, not only is that job well paid, it's highly respected, but it's one of the safest positions in America too. So for all those reasons, son, daughter, even though maybe you want to be an artist, but you're going to become a doctor. Again, I don't want to go too far with that stereotype because obviously there's many Asian Americans that do 1,000 different careers. But it is also true that it's not surprising that if you get into pre-med classes, like when I was an undergraduate, that my undergraduate classes, because I was thinking about going into medical school, were chock full of Asian Americans. Some of them wanted to be there because they wanted to be a surgeon or a doctor or orthopedist, whatever. and that's their heart was, their passion was. Some of them, frankly, did not want to do it, but mom and dad are like, "You're gonna do it." A lot of factors there, but again, Confucianism is part of that background. There is some good things, obviously, many good quality, high quality things about Confucianism, very helpful. Again, maintain harmony, ethical duty. If you are dealing with an Asian American family who is relatively recent immigrants, you have to understand Confucian when you act with their parents. Like, let's be really practical. Like my wife being Korean, when I met her parents, I got to be on my toes, remind myself what Confucianism is like. That means respect. I maintain eye contact. When you bow when you meet them, when you listen to them, when they give you advice, you salute and you're very respectful. By the way, that's what I was going to do anyways. But just there's much more to Confucianism I didn't mention. I give you kind of a short version of this. I'll give you a couple brief examples as we move on. So, for example, on the left, this is a Korean cartoon, contemporary times. This is a boss talking to one of his female employees, maybe a coffee shop, whatever. They're chatting, and he says, "You remind me of my daughter." Nice thing to say, but maybe a little bit loaded. What does the boss want from you? Now, here's what she would not say out loud, but this is a piece kind of showing Confucianism, but she's thinking, you don't have any daughters, you have 2 sons. Translation, she's kind of nervous, like, what do you want from me? He's saying like a daughter, like, are you hitting on me as a boss? But of course, she cannot easily say that, right? Instead, she smiles. She knows she's not making eye contact with him, right? She's bowing to him a little bit because he's her boss, right? Confucian, he's a superior. And she's smiling, and she would say something very polite, like, thank you. That's a wonderful thing to say, that you reminded me of your daughter, even though she knows she does not have daughters. And she's thinking you have only sons, and she's nervous, but she smiles and maintains that Confucian relationship dutifully. By the way, if he would try to make some inappropriate advance on her, it depends on the woman, of course, but in a Confucian context, she'd probably be embarrassed and try to get out of there, but would be unlikely to publicly confront him because he's her boss. He's a superior. It'd be very difficult to even work for him if it ever happened. So more likely she would look for some kind of way to flee that situation if she feels uncomfortable, traditionally. Yeah, traditionally. Now, people are people. Modern Korean woman might confront him, but might not, because, again, her fear. All right. These are more, I'm trying to figure out, I want to take time to go through all these, but again, I give you an example of Confucianism. The cartoon you guys are looking at in front of you is talking about a boss that's holding a bag that says feeling rewarded. So he's going to his employee. The boss, by the way, is the big guy on the right. His employee's on the left. So the boss is like, hey, you've been working really hard. I'm going to give you a little bonus. Sounds nice. Again, your boss is talking to you, right? So as an employee, he's your superior. You definitely say, thank you so much. I really appreciate the bonus you're giving me. But the employee's thinking, you've been forcing me to do overtime for a long time. I'm working my tail off for you. How about you simply pay me my overtime? You don't need to give me any bonus. Pay me for overtime because, by the way, he's not been paid for his overtime. There's been no overtime pay. So boss is like, hey, I'm giving you, thank you, appreciate you. But the bonus he's giving him is no way the same as what the overtime wages would be. But again, the employee is very nervous to bring that up. So instead, he would just simply say, thank you, that's wonderful, thank you for the bonus. Even though inside he's like, just pay me overtime. That's what I really want because you're abusing me, you're exploiting me. But again, to say that to a boss is very difficult. And so instead, you give it like, thank you for the bonus. After you leave, you're probably mad, but you're not going to say that to your boss because, again, he's your superior. In the Confucian universe, it's very difficult to have that kind of conversation. All right. There's many more examples I could give you guys what Confucianism is like. I'm trying to think if I want to do one more or not because I want to try to make this lecture not too long. Maybe I just better let it go. But there's much more Confucianism. It's a powerful, by the way, it has like all thought systems. It has some wonderful aspects to it. Respect for the aged, it's wonderful. Harmony, wonderful. The difficulty is if you have a superior who in any way is taking advantage of his inferior, it's very difficult in Confucianism for an inferior to successfully protect yourself without causing a real war in a sense. It's not easy. Now, if your boss is kind, Confucians work very well because they'll do very, very good to you, very thoughtful to you, care for you, and since they know what they're doing, when you take advice from them, it will work out well for you. But Confucianism assumes that people are all dutifully doing the right thing. Now, in the real world, if they're not, it can make it kind of complicated in the Confucian world and quite difficult. Okay, that's enough. We better move on to Taoism. And I'll make Taoism, try to make this short and sweet. So Taoism is completely unlike Confucianism. Confucianism is a very practical guide for how you morally work together with husband, wife, kids, teacher, boss, governor, etc. It's very practical. Taoism is a very mystical way to respond to the challenges in life. So there isn't really even a per se of like a list of like, here's what you do as a Taoist in a sense. Taoism is much more of a mystical mindset on how you approach life. In this case, the rational material world does not really matter. It's the cosmic world of nature that really truly matters. So your goal as a Taoist is to let go of your desire to be in control of the material world kind of around you, and instead to be mystically connected to the cosmic world around you. Which again sounds kind of mystical, but it is mystical. So that's not wrong. So in a more practical way to define Taoism for you guys is it's an acceptance of a reality around you. Maybe that's a better way to try it. And by the way, so how do you perceive reality around you, right? And you perceive reality by immersing yourself in the reality as taught through nature. So let me show you that piece of artwork here again briefly, right here. It's a very Taoist kind of piece of artwork, which by the way pervades East Asian art. You see East Asian sage or scholar sitting there on this tree. It's a very Taoist painting. Let me explain what I mean by that. Notice that tree he's sitting on, the base of it, that trunk, fortunately for him, is leaned over, so it makes a nice rustic seat for him, and he's relaxing there. Let me get a drink here. Look at that pine tree. Pine tree is obviously old. It's been through a lot of tough seasons. You can see it's missing some branches right here. Even its crooked kind of nature as it kind of has grown, but yet it remains beautiful, even in our Western perception of its kind of scarred, irregular look to it. Like, for example, you're not going to make a beam out of that tree. But in a Taoist mind, that tree is a perfect analogy for how we have to go with the passive flow of how life comes. That tree has not fought the storms, but it survived. So when heavy winter snows come and maybe even broke off some branches, but the tree survives. The winds, the heat, the drought, the tree's had to adapt itself to the reality of the seasons after all these years and even centuries, in fact. But the tree has survived and continued to remain beautiful. Although again, it's maybe life has not turned out the way the tree wanted it to, but the tree endures. It adjusts itself to the reality, in this case, the climate around it. That's a very Taoist perception of how the Taoist person accepts the reality of what is. Okay. Confucianism, you guys know, is a way you deal with a very active life and family, politics, education, so forth. The Taoism is probably how the Chinese person deals with loss and pain. Because Confucianism doesn't necessarily address those per se. But Confucianism is not a religion. So if you lose something, someone you love dies who's close to you, how do you cope with that? And traditionally in China, Taoism might be the path to go there to try to adjust and to accept the reality of what has happened. All right, we're going to move quickly through these. By the way, typically Chinese don't follow just historical, follow just one philosophy. For example, they're probably not just a Confucian. It's a good chance that in many ways they're Confucian in the practical matter, their daily relationship with people. But again, they adjust to difficulty, stress, hardship, oftentimes through Taoism. Also Buddhism too. I'm not talking about Buddhism yet because we'll get that in the next lecture. But Buddhism also is likely a part of it. So it really depends on the individual Chinese person or East Asian person on what kind of mix of these philosophies do they use to cope with life. Oftentimes a good portion of it will be Confucianism, And then maybe, depending on the individual, some Buddhism as well as Taoism come into play as well too. Perhaps all three of those informing their thought as they move through life. All right. The first emperor of China, I'll make this short and sweet because he's going to set the mode for how the Chinese have been ruled through almost all their history. So he comes to power, and again, I'll try to make this brief. But what he does is, during his lifetime, he transforms China. He unites all of China under his control. This would be in about 260 BC. He set himself as an absolute autocratic ruler of all China. There is no legislature that beneath him balances power. No, all power is in his hands. He sets in motion a dynastic pattern or ruling structure where the emperor has immense absolute authority and runs China according to his will. And that will be the Chinese system of government all the way from his reign all the way down to the modern world. And even a little bit currently the leader of China right now, Xi would never claim himself to be an emperor. But he kind of rules a little bit like one, frankly. He was both brilliant. He's also very harsh, can be very cruel as well, too. I think for time, we're going to kind of move quickly through most of this. But again, he becomes the absolute model for what a Chinese emperor can do. Is all powerful. And it can be both sides of that, both the dark side of that and also the good side as well, that too. I'm not going to break down really what he did in his rule. You'll get that in a world history class. But the Great Wall was not necessarily started by him, but that's part of his vision to protect China. So probably the most dramatic example of his rule is probably the good and the bad. He did execute many, many people. He's very ruthless in his holding on to power, about both coming to power and holding on to power. He did some very un-Chinese-like things. For example, he just killed many Confucian scholars. That, by the way, is very un-Chinese. So that aspect of him is not typically Chinese, which means great respect for the past. But he feared the influence of Chinese Confucian scholars. He executed many of them because his ruling style was autocratic, frankly tyrannical. Many Chinese scholars criticized him for not ruling as a proper Confucian, which of course he was not. He despised Confucianism. So many of them he had buried alive, executed, tried to destroy Chinese history. So on the one hand, while he sets a model of Chinese ruling style, which is an absolute autocrat, on the other hand, though, he's very un-Chinese in his rejection of Confucianism, his attempt to destroy Chinese history, and so forth. Okay. His tomb to this day remains one of the most extraordinary tombs in human history. I'm not going to get into that deeply as mentioned. It just shows the wealth, power, technological sophistication of China during his reign, which again is being the 200s BC when he reigned, and that massive army he had buried with him, which are called the Xi'an figures. You see some examples of them in front of you. This life-size army of over 5,000 life-size soldiers made out of terracotta who were buried with him to take with him into the afterlife. Extraordinarily expensive, gives you an idea of the size, power, and cultural ability of China to even construct something of this extraordinary magnitude to put into a tomb. Never be seen again until obviously the modern world. So significance of him, again, mentioned he was a brilliant general, ruler. Our very word China actually comes from his family name, which is the Qin. His all-powerful style of ruling will often be the model both for China, also to some degree Korea and East Asia, Japan as well. He did do some major good things, reforms in China, which I'm not going to get into. But there's also, as you guys know, had a very dark side to him. His extermination of any opposition, his killing of Confucian scholars, his attempt to control history by eliminating history. The Silk Road, I think we're not going to get into that. You guys probably already familiar with that, so we'll fast forward past that. China, through most of its history, is not threatened by other sophisticated peoples. I mentioned the Chinese view themselves as the best, most sophisticated. And in some ways, certainly in the world, in many ways, that is true. Oftentimes, the only real threat to China are the nomadic people who live north of China, for which the Great Wall is to be there, as you guys know. The Xiongnu are some of the most famous of these. These are pre-Mongol-like people, nomadic horseback people who periodically threaten China. Of course, the Great Wall is built to stop them from doing that. My only point with all that is the Chinese do not see them as a sophisticated, cultural, technologically advanced rival. They see the Xiongnu as utter contemptible barbarians who are very talented warriors and pose a great threat to China, but not a cultural, not a technological challenge to China, because again, China is the greatest. The Xiongnu are a very serious threat to them, but it's a threat of barbarians. Maybe as you guys are a kid, you guys watched Mulan. That's the Xiongnu threatening China. All right. So again, China view themselves as the best nation in the world. All others are inferior. So I mentioned that already. A few last things about China because we got to leave China. Tang Dynasty, again, you don't know the name, but I just want you to know that Tang Dynasty is considered a golden age of China. Give you some idea of the size of the Chinese capital. And that in that time period, you can see what that time period is. That's from the 600 to 907 AD. Maybe I should add 80 in there. Although, again, you guys don't need to know the date to that, but just to give you guys a range of when that is. By the way, that is the Dark Ages in Europe, in case you're wondering. Dark Age in Europe. The Tang Dynasty are the most advanced civilization in the world in that time period. Their capital was the biggest city in the world. Probably Chang'an City had a population of at least 1 million people in that era. 2 massive palaces dominated that city. This whole region you see right here, which is the Imperial City, and then a second palace called the Damian Palace right here, both of which are massive. This is today a contemporary reconstruction of the Damian Palace. All this is one palace. By the way, that's a second palace within the same city, because you also, as I showed you, have this palace structure right here. Why do you need 2 of these massive palaces? Look how many buildings are in that one palace structure. Again, let you know that the wealth of China, the magnificence, the size of population, the ability to construct something so large, so magnificent, frankly, so extravagant. This is really a city by itself, as you see right there. You even have your own lake that the emperor can use for pleasure. You don't have to even leave the imperial palace to go on a lake trip for the weekend. No, it's in the palace grounds. How those pavilions may have looked in that time period. Looks like a nice place to spend a weekend. I don't know about you guys. Yeah, I think I'd like to visit. Sadly, the Damian Palace is long gone, but that's... All right, we're getting close to being done with China. I'm going to move on to Korea briefly, but I wanted to know you guys some examples of impact of Chinese culture from the Tang Dynasty down to today for you and I. So tea drinking becomes a major commodity in the Tang Dynasty. Tea drinking individually was a product useful to Buddhist monks in meditation. The long hours of meditation, you have to fall asleep, and both the taste but both the caffeine allowed them to stay focused as they spiritually meditate. It's also enjoyable to drink. So both of those becomes a major commodity used by Chinese socially, as we do. Now meditation too, but also socially. And it becomes a major commodity drunk throughout China for all those social occasions, get together, stress release, caffeine for all those regions becomes a major commodity. And that's certainly a legacy down to us today too. Now in American context, you might be drinking a sweet tea, which I also like. By the way, I love green tea. I also like sweet tea. I like tea in general. There's not many teas I don't like. I like it both the American sweet tea style, with some, you see some lemons in there and some sugar, maybe little spices in there too, some other fruit. Delicious, some ice. Love it. But that's really the long-term repercussions of Chinese culture coming to America. Now, Americanized some, and American culture, Southern culture, but really the origin of that, of course, is the classical China civilization, in China's case, the Tang Dynasty. All right, last few things here. We're going to wrap it up with China. China, in order to enter government service, you take a very difficult exam. I'm not going to get into the details of that. I just want you to know. But that exam, although very difficult, but if you pass this exam, think like the SAT on steroids, or in the American context today, it'd be like the bar exam. That's my wife. They call her that. That's like taking the bar exam, finishing law school, or the exam to finish medical school. It's a difficult exam. But if you pass this government exam, you become a high-level government official. That's not like in America being elected. This is in China, so it's both respect, honor, and power. So if you pass this extraordinarily difficult exam, that exam opens a new world to you of respect, honor, power. It's the good life for you, your family, all those close to you. The exam is very difficult, very complex, takes years and years of study and brilliance to pass this thing. My point of that is, again, But that emphasis on education and pouring everything into an exam to get you where you need to go socially for your family, again, that resonates, again, to some degree. I don't get pushed too far, but in the East Asian experience of seeing education as a pathway to success, prosperity, safety, honor, a good relationship. All right. Traditionally in China, I mentioned Confucianism is very strong, separates the genders. Okay, I take that call. I'm sorry. Okay, so I just want to keep it really simple. Traditionally, Chinese women historically are considered the inferior sex. The Tang Dynasty is a rare moment in all the Chinese dynasties where Chinese women had a much higher degree of gender. I wouldn't call it gender equality because that's not what they had, but they did have a lot more freedom. But historically, that would not be the case. In Confucianism, there's usually a very strong separation of genders. Frankly, it's quite limiting for what women are able to do historically. But the Tang was a golden age in China in which the Chinese women were much freer of oftentimes very strict gender expectations and norms. So you don't need to know the details of that. We can kind of fast forward through all that. I just want you to be aware that's the reality for Chinese women historically. For example, in the Tang Dynasty, the only time where actually a Chinese female ruler ruled in her own right, it wasn't for very long. And the Chinese historically viewed that as very negative because a woman should not rule according to traditional Chinese beliefs. That's frankly unnatural. It's against the order of the universe for a woman to actually be in power. So the fact that one did briefly, traditional view of China was she did that through negative means and was a blight on China, that she should not have been in power in that time period. Well, again, the point of that, just realize it's not just Confucians, but Confucians is a big part of that, of their perceptions of power and who should have power. In this case, it should not be female dominated. Okay. That takes us to the Song Dynasty. I just want to mention a couple of things, and we're going to leave the Song. The Song is, again, after the Tang. The Song is considered one of the great Chinese dynasties. You can see the dates there from 960 to 1279. Again, actually, I don't care whether you know the date. I just want you to know what they do. It's a technologically important age of China, and a lot of amazing technological achievements come out of it. Movable type for printing, the compass, which you see right here, is invented in China during the Song Dynasty. Gunpowder also was invented during the Song Dynasty. Many other high-level advances. Frankly, the most advanced society in the world technologically, scientifically, in many ways, was the Song Dynasty. So you have brilliant inventions that really change the world. Think of gunpowder, think of the compass, movable type, etc., that make China one of the preeminent cultural, inventive cultures in the world during this specific dynasty, which is the Song. Paper money, other things too. Again, you don't need to write all that stuff down. Just wanted you to have this Song, its cultural brilliance, technological innovation, solar clocks, rocketry, fireworks, machines of various kinds. And in that general time period too, you have this great voyage by the Chinese Admiral Xing He, in which he takes these massive voyages out to demonstrate China's power to the larger world. Let me show you examples of the size of Chinese great ships on these voyages that he took in the 1400s. That's a Chinese treasure ship there in the background. That's the size of, say, Columbus's ship of navigation. I'll let you decide which one of those you want to take on a beach cruise. They let you know the power, wealth, and technological sophistication of China, that these are the ships they're able to construct in that time period and to sail compared to the typical corresponding European ship of the era. Now, the irony, though, of China being so advanced is China is not in a feeling of great need to explore the larger world. China feels like we are the center. So the desire to explore is not really there. Now, again, to trade, yes, China was interested in trade. Demonstrate Chinese power, yes. To perhaps find some new things. But they don't have that profound hunger because, again, in many ways, China being so geographically large and productive, they feel that China has most things we need. So we don't really need to go to the larger world as a core necessity, whereas Europe, being quite a bit smaller and things that they want, is much more driven. But the impact of that Chinese expeditions is quite profound. But the irony is China does not go out to explore the much larger world. They technologically absolutely could have. That fleet could have gone to the Americas, probably easily, but they don't have the same drive and interest. My point with that is they have the technology to do it, the money, and the power to do it. But again, China being so sophisticated and developed, they don't feel the need to do that. All right, that takes us on to Korea, and I'll try to make this relatively short. Although, wife being Korean, I have some requirement to give this some good attention. Now, Korea in many ways is a small brother to China, both geographically and culturally. There's the Korean Peninsula, which is relatively small. It's quite mountainous, as you see from both of these maps, both the satellite map today and also a geographic map on the left. China is a great cultural source of Korea. Now, Korea has a lot of its own indigenous culture, of course, but they're heavily influenced by Chinese, almost everything. Thought systems, Confucianism, arts, food, military science, government style, fashion, you name it. Now, the Koreans are very proud to adapt the Chinese larger model and to tweak it, adapt it, maybe in some ways you might even improve it to fit Korean. So you would not, for example, you live in Korea, you would not think I'm in China at the time period. You would not think that. But Chinese culture is pervasive in Korea. But Korea is also very proud to maintain a separate identity. They did not want to be added into China, even though they have great admiration for China, view China as an older brother, but they're Korean. And so they're very proud to be independent and to be Korea. They don't want to be absorbed into the Chinese majority. They want to be influenced by China and take the good cultural things, but still very proud to remain who they are, which is Korean, which is a distinct nation and culture and people. So they fought very hard to do that. And I'm going to move quickly through some of these Korean dynasties. Like China, Korean history is divided into various dynasties. They'll be heavily influenced by Chinese culture and religion, in this case Buddhism, Confucianism, of course, despite the fact that, again, they take a very strong pride and fought very hard to protect their separate Korean identity. That's a Buddhist pagoda there on the left, and a famous temple in South Korea today. That's a Korean crown for the monarchy during this, it's called the Shilla Dynasty. Buddhist temple in Korea that dates from that Shilla Dynasty. Some more examples of Buddhist temples in Korea. Buddhism, of course, playing a great role. And I'll talk about Buddhism when we lecture on India. Buddhism would be the religion of the majority of Koreans. Again, Confucianism is there, but Confucianism is not a religion, right? So if you're a religious person, historically in Korea, Buddhism would be your faith system. Confucianism is an ethical system which people may be pursuing too, but it's not a religion. Some examples of Korean court fashion from that time period, again, influenced by Chinese fashion, in this case of Tang Dynasty, but again, they'd tweak it and modify it to fit Korean taste as well too. Some more examples, the next Korean dynasty would be the Goryeo Dynasty and some of their fine arts there. In East Asia, ceramics or porcelain would be a big part of their cultural achievement. In this case, in Korea, a special ware called celadon, which has that greenish light hue or color to it. It's a masterpiece of Korean artistic design, which is celadon. In East Asia, that teapot we see there, or wine ewer, is not just a kitchen utensil. It's considered a masterpiece of fine art. So in the West, when we think of tea sets, of course, we like them. We spend a great deal of money for them. But it's like a very nice, fancy kitchen utensil. Now, it is also in East Asia and in China and Korea too. But it's also considered a masterpiece of art. Now, it's a useful art, of course, but a masterpiece of art as well. That's the Korean dragon on the right there, holding a bell there in its teeth. Some more examples of the fine art of Korean celadon ceramics, which the Korean Goryeo Dynasty was very proud of. This, again, would be for pouring, could be for alcohol or for tea. You'd hold the back of this dragonfish and pour it from its mouth. They're conquered by the Mongols, devastated by the Mongols. I won't spend too long on that, but like most of East Asia, the Mongols will devastate the Korean peninsula, do a lot of damage to them, leave a long cultural memory of pain for them. I mentioned already that Korea views China as the great center. So if you are a Chinese scholar, your dream would be to travel to China and study in China. You would actually read and write in Chinese. You'd speak verbally Korean, but your reading and writing will actually be in Chinese during these earlier time periods. This map right here shows you a map of China, which is the Great Middle right there. The Korean Peninsula is next to it, but the fact that it's a Chinese map is in the center shows you the Korean mindset, which is China is the great center of the world. We are on the side of that. Okay, we are close to the finish line. So some more examples of Korean celadonity, which for them would be one of the high points of art in this time period. If you're a wealthy person, you would have these in your house, both a display of your wealth, but also these are practical because you might use these for holding liquids, oftentimes wine, but it could be tea as well too. A few more things about Korean culture. Ginseng is a big part of, also in China too, but considered an amazing medicinal subject, product that could do amazing health things for you. There's a ginseng root. You see there right there, here's an example of ginseng root. It's considered almost to have a, not quite magical, that'd be too far, but ginseng considered to have extraordinary health properties in it. Wild found ginseng is worth a ton of money, even now. So both historically, it's a big part of the medical world in Asia. By the way, oftentimes, you guys are probably aware of this. If you today, even now, if you live, say, in China, Japan, Korea, if you get ill, you have a couple options. You can go to what they view as a Western-style hospital. Of course, many of them do. But you can also go to what is considered like Chinese traditional medicine. That'd be a pharmacy, like pharmacies we have here in the U.S., but that pharmacy would concentrate on the Chinese perspective of the body and medicine. And you would have many, many various herbs and all kinds of Chinese traditional medicines, many of them plant-based, one kind or another, that a person may go to take. So you would have, I guess, multiple medical options if you're treating some medical condition to use for Chinese traditional medicine in the modern world or modern medicine. Now, obviously, historically in Korea in the past, in China, you're not going to have that Western focus. You have an Eastern pharmacist or physician treating you with a variety of things, of which ginseng would simply be one. Yeah, ginseng is quite popular in the United States too, right? You know, sometimes some drinks are infused with ginseng. That's a medicine right there, ginseng. When my wife having gone through breast cancer, when he visited Korea this last time, her family gave her some very high quality ginseng to bring back to the U.S. Tea. And actually here in my office, my wife gave me something for lunch today along with my lunch. That's ginseng tea. So that is continued in the modern world, the Asian American experience. By the way, all Asian American communities probably have their own version of that. Again, it depends how long in the United States, but their connection to Asian style medicine and health. I think for time we're going to skip through that, but just an influence of Korean Buddhism, dealing with national threats in this case, the Mongolian invasion. And I think we'll stop right there. That's probably enough on an introduction to both China and Korea. Now, obviously, we've covered, several thousand years briefly. In the next lecture, we'll get into Japan and Southeast Asia and India. But that's just a brief introduction. But the takeaway from that is the very complex, long, highly sophisticated history of East Asia and the impact that has on both the Asian immigrants from East Asia immigrate to the United States, and its continuing impact on who they view themselves, their self-identity, their cultural identity, their heritage, their pride, the wisdom they have access to in these traditions, that still plays a resonant role in many Asian American lives today. Again, depending on how long they've been here. So again, that's quite complex, but still remains very impactful on who they are and their identity and their worldview. So with that, that's the end of this lecture. We'll see you with part 2, and we'll get into the rest of East Asia and then into South and Central Asia as well too. So take care, everybody.